Julian Ashford declined her fourth call at 9:22 on a Saturday night without looking up from his steak. That's the detail that stays. Not the October rain driving sideways off Lake Michigan. Not the hospital 3 miles north where her father was being prepped for emergency surgery alone. Not the biopsy results sitting in her phone like a live wire she hadn't been able to bring herself to touch in 10 days. Just that, Julian's eyes on his plate, his thumb finding her name on the screen, and the small, almost imperceptible motion that sent her call to voicemail. He said it to Pierce afterward, leaning back in his chair at the best table in the room. She worries too much. She'll figure it out. He said it the way you say something you've said so many times it no longer requires thought. Miriam Kale always figured it out. That was the whole problem. She had been running Anchor and Bean since she was 29, which meant she had been solving problems before problem-solving felt like something she'd chosen. The cafe sat on the corner of Roscoe and Damon, a narrow room with exposed brick and mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu she updated every Monday in her own handwriting. It smelled of dark roast and something sweet that changed with the season: cardamom in fall, orange zest in winter, lavender when she felt optimistic about spring. She had bought it with the settlement money from her divorce, which everyone in her life had opinions about, and none of those opinions had mattered. The divorce had given her Kit, 4 years old at the time, and now 5, who slept with a stuffed bison named Captain, and who had recently become committed to the position that spiders were misunderstood. The cafe had given her a reason to be at the counter by 5:30 in the morning, which in the darkest months after her marriage ended was the thing that had kept her functional. She was not a woman who asked for help easily. She had examined that fact about herself from multiple angles and arrived at the same conclusion each time. She didn't ask because she had learned, specifically, that asking and receiving were not guaranteed to occur in sequence. Her ex-husband had taught her that lesson first. Julian was still teaching her the same one, differently, with better furniture. She had met Julian 2.5 years ago at a neighborhood zoning meeting she hadn't wanted to attend but had, because a new development down the block was going to reroute the foot traffic that kept her cafe solvent. Julian had been on the development side of the table. He was the kind of man who owned a room without appearing to try. 41, broad-shouldered, with the particular stillness of someone who had never needed to raise his voice to be heard. He had looked across the table at her while she made her case about pedestrian routing, and she had felt the specific discomfort of being genuinely seen by someone she was supposed to be arguing against. They had been together since November of that year. The first year was good. The second year was good in pieces, with longer stretches between the pieces. The third year, which was where they were now, was the year she had started keeping a mental list she didn't want to call a list. She had found a lump, found it herself the way women do, ordinary, reaching for something on a high shelf, her hand brushing her ribs wrong. She had called her doctor on a Tuesday. The biopsy had been the following Thursday. That was 10 days ago. She had not told Julian. She had tried. Thursday, the dinner he canceled. Work emergency, he said, a phrase that had stopped feeling descriptive and started feeling like a category. Friday, the call she made at 7 p.m. that went to voicemail and was returned the following morning by a text that said had a late night, catch up this weekend? The weekend being today. The weekend being him at a client dinner she hadn't been invited to, which was fine. She understood client dinners. She needed 5 minutes. She needed to say the word out loud to someone who would still be there after she said it. But Julian had not answered on Saturday. Not the first call at 7 p.m. when she was watching Kit eat his macaroni and thought, I'll try him after bedtime. Not the second, at 8:15, when the hospital rang on the other line to say her father, Henry Kale, admitted 20 minutes ago, fell in the kitchen, right hip, possible internal bleeding, prepping for surgery, and she had stood in Kit's doorway and understood she could not fall apart yet. Not the third call, when she was already strapping Kit into his car seat in the rain, phone wedged between her ear and her shoulder, listening to Julian's greeting with the particular dread of someone who already knows what they're going to hear. Not the fourth. Pierce answered Julian's personal line after the fourth attempt, in the careful, neutral tone of someone trained to manage exactly this situation. "Mr. Ashford is with clients. Can I take a message?" She said, "Tell him it's Miriam. Tell him my father is in surgery." Pierce said he would pass it along. He did. Julian heard it. He picked up his fork. The ER waiting room at Northwestern smelled like antiseptic and old coffee and the damp of 30 wet coats in a closed space. Kit sat beside her with his coloring book open, tongue at the corner of his mouth, carefully giving a cartoon dinosaur a red and purple spotted pattern the original illustrators had not intended. The surgeon had come out 20 minutes after they arrived. A woman in her 50s with dark circles and a direct manner that Miriam trusted immediately. She explained the situation in the language of someone accustomed to translating emergency into digestible information. Stable, but concerning. The hip was one issue. The internal bleeding was the more urgent one. She was recommending an embolization procedure, minimally invasive, lower risk than open surgery, but still a procedure. She needed next of kin authorization. Miriam had signed without hesitating. She was the only next of kin in the state. Her brother was already on the phone with airlines in Phoenix. Then it was just her and Kit and the waiting room. She had her phone in her hand. She had been looking at it since they arrived, partly watching for Julian, partly watching for the notification she had been dreading for 10 days. Her patient portal updated on a rolling basis. The biopsy report had been flagged as available since 7:47 p.m., 3 minutes before her father's hospital called. She had not opened it. She knew the clinical logic. Opening the notification would not change what was inside it. Whatever it said was already true, had been true since the lab finalized it. And yet, she hadn't opened it because she had a plan, built quietly and without ceremony, for how this was supposed to go. She was not going to read it alone. In a parking lot, a break room, some fluorescent nowhere. She was going to read it with Julian across from her, and if the news was bad, he would be there, and that would matter, and she would not have to hold it alone. Julian was not here. "Mama," Kit said, holding up the coloring page, "is this too many spots?" She looked at the dinosaur. It had approximately 47 spots. "No such thing," she said. He accepted this and went back to work. Miriam opened the patient portal. She read the results twice, the second time slowly. There was language she understood and language she would need her doctor to translate. But the word she had been most afraid of, the word she had been constructing her dread around for 10 days, was not there. Benign, with recommendation for follow-up imaging in 6 months. Low clinical concern. She stared at the screen. She had prepared herself for relief. She had imagined the specific quality of breathing that follows 10 days of not quite breathing. She had imagined calling Julian, imagined his voice, imagined saying, it's okay, I'm okay." What she felt, sitting in a hospital waiting room with her father in surgery and her son giving dinosaurs polka dots, was not what she had prepared for. She felt how alone she had been. Not just tonight. Tonight was just the shape the whole year had finally taken. She felt the Thursday dinner, the Friday morning text, the 3 months of Sunday evenings after Kit was in bed where she had thought, "I'll tell him this week," and then found another reason to wait for a better moment. She felt all of it, and then underneath all of it, she felt the word she had not let herself use, not even in her own head. Afraid. She had been afraid for 10 days, and there had been nowhere to put it. She turned her phone face down on the empty seat beside her and watched her son work. "That is a very good dinosaur," she said. Kit held it up. "His name is Spots." "Obviously," she said. Julian arrived at 11:14. She recognized his walk before she saw his face, the rhythm of someone who had never once arrived somewhere uncertain of his reception. He came through the waiting room doors and found her immediately, the way he always did, and for 1 second, something in her wanted to move toward him, because he was familiar, and the night had been very long. She didn't move. He sat in the chair beside her, Kit was asleep across two chairs, coat folded under his head. Julian looked at Kit, then at her. "How's your dad?" "Still in surgery. Should be another hour." "Why didn't you call me sooner?" She looked at him directly. "Let that sit." "I called you 4 times, Julian." He did the thing she had watched him do before, the small recalibration, the slight adjustment of a man stepping into a situation he had just realized he'd misread. "I was with the Hartfield Group. This deal is $30 million. I know what it is." He went quiet. "I'm not angry at you about tonight," she said. It was true, and she meant it as precision, not as softening. "I'm past tonight. I've been past tonight for a while." Something shifted in his face. What does that mean? She had not planned this conversation. She had planned something calmer, with a table between them and good coffee and a week where her father wasn't in surgery and her son wasn't asleep 4 feet away. But she had learned, slowly and at some cost, not to wait for the right moment. The right moment was a story she had been telling herself for 2.5 years. "I found a lump," she said, 10 days ago. Julian went still in the way of someone who has just understood that the ground has changed under them. "I had a biopsy. I've been waiting for the results." She paused. "I got them tonight, about 2 hours ago, sitting here." He didn't speak. "It's benign," she said. "Follow up in 6 months. I'm okay." She looked at her hands. "But I didn't know that until 2 hours ago, and I spent the 10 days between finding it and tonight trying to get 5 minutes with you where you were actually present. Not texting, not half listening, not checking your phone." She looked at the rain-streaked window. "I couldn't get 5 minutes." A long silence. When she looked back at him, his face had the quality of someone who has just calculated the full scope of something they thought they understood. "You should have told me," he said. "I tried," she said. "Not hard enough, maybe. But I tried in the ways that work with you, adjusted the timing, looked for the right opening, made sure my needs weren't inconvenient, and none of it worked." She shook her head. "I've been doing that for longer than 10 days. Julian looked at Kit sleeping. He looked like he was trying to find the right architecture for what he wanted to say. "I'll go," she said quietly. "When Dad's out, I'll take a cab. I needed you to know." "Let me drive you home." He looked at her. "Let me do that one thing." She said yes, because Kit was asleep and it was midnight, and some negotiations could wait until she was less tired. The surgeon appeared at 12:30. The procedure had gone well. Stable recovery, one visitor for 15 minutes. Miriam went in alone. Her father was smaller in the bed than he was in her life. He always was, every time, and it always surprised her. She held his hand. He opened his eyes for about 4 seconds and looked at her with the specific expression of someone swimming up from a long way down. Then he went back under. 4 seconds was enough. Julian drove them home at 1:30, Kit asleep the whole way with his neck at an angle that would hurt in the morning. He carried Kit inside without being asked and laid him on the couch while Miriam pulled off his sneakers. At the door, Julian said, "I'm sorry." She nodded. "I mean it." "I know you do," she said. She did know that. It was never the question. But meaning it and changing are not the same thing. "I need the second one." She looked at him in the doorway. "I need you to go home." He went. He did not send flowers. He knew her well enough for that. He called, and she didn't answer. And he left a voicemail 2 minutes long with no excuses in it, which she listened to 3 times before deleting. He called the next day. She didn't answer. The day after. On the 4th day, he showed up at the café at 7 a.m. and stood in line with the other customers. He ordered a coffee he always said was too strong. He sat in the corner with his laptop, worked for 3 hours, and left without asking for anything. He came back the following week, and the week after that. Kit noticed before she acknowledged what was happening. "Is that Julian?" he said one Saturday, mouth full of a scone he'd gotten onto the menu by looking at her with a particular expression. "He's here a lot." "Yes," she said. "Is he your friend?" She watched Julian at the corner table, not looking at her, not performing anything, just there. "I don't know yet," she said. Her father came home in November, slow and argumentative about his physical therapy in a way that meant he was going to be fine. Her brother flew in for a week and repaired 3 things in the house that had been broken since spring. Julian came to dinner once, said the wrong thing about baseball, and then sat quietly while Henry corrected him for 20 minutes. Her father called him the wrong name twice after that, and then one afternoon got it right. And Miriam took note of this without saying anything about it. In December, she let Julian take her and Kit to the tree lighting downtown. Not a date. She was careful internally about what she called things. Just 3 people and a lot of hot chocolate, and Kit insisting the main tree was at least 100 feet tall. Maybe more. Probably more. Julian agreed it was probably more. He didn't check his phone the entire evening. She noticed and said nothing about noticing. On New Year's Day, Kit was at her mother's. The café was closed. The city was quieter than it ever was. Julian came to the door with a paper bag from the deli on Clark Street and rang the bell. She stood in her own doorway and thought about the night in October when she had read a biopsy report alone on her phone while her son colored beside her. She thought about what it had cost her to carry that, and what it had cost her more, the quietness of carrying it. So quiet that the person who should have been there didn't know there was anything to carry at all. She opened the door. "One condition," she said. He waited. "When I call," she said, "you answer, not every time. I understand there are situations where you genuinely cannot, but you call back within 10 minutes, you tell me why, and it is a real reason." She held his gaze. "That's not a small ask." "It's not," he said without softening it. "I need it anyway." "Okay," he said. She stepped back. The apartment smelled like coffee, and the burned cinnamon toast Kit had been making himself every morning, a phase she hoped was almost over, and the ordinary warm mess of a life that belonged entirely to her. Julian set the bag on the counter and turned around, and she looked at him the way she had trained herself not to look at people for a long time, without armor, without the distance she kept to avoid exactly this kind of risk. "Don't make me do it alone again," she said. "I won't," he said. She didn't know yet if she believed him. That was the honest truth, and honest truth was the only kind she had patience for anymore. She was going to find out. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A photo from her brother in Phoenix, his daughter buried in confetti, smiling the specific smile of a child who has never in her life believed anything was worth worrying about. Miriam picked up the phone. She answered it. That small act, picking up, reaching back, shouldn't have felt like anything worth noting. But it did. It felt like the thing she'd finally learned to do. After October, after the waiting room, after all the careful adjustments she'd made to fit herself around someone else's calendar. She had stopped waiting to be reached for. Kit came home at 4 and found Julian on a step stool, restringing the lights above the kitchen window that had been falling since September. Kit stood in the doorway in his coat and boots and assessed the situation with the particular gravity of a 5-year-old deciding something important. "Spots needs new crayons," he announced. "Tomorrow," Miriam said. He dropped his backpack and went to find his coloring book, apparently satisfied with the general state of things. Julian climbed down from the step stool. The lights stayed up this time. She had said they wouldn't hold, but they were holding, at least for now, which was the nature of most things worth keeping. She handed him the end of the string to hold while she plugged them in, and they lit up gold against the kitchen window, and neither of them made anything of it. Some beginnings don't need a speech. They just need someone to finally show up and stay.